What's good? Sorry, it's late. For some reason I wanted to start reading at 11 o'clock at night. Don't ask me questions for all. I honestly couldn't tell you the reason why I have done what I have did. Um, but nonetheless, I probably won't be reading one chapter today. I just feel like one chapter is not enough. But at the same time, I think I'm gonna try like differences. I might skip a chapter here, but I'll probably summarize it and then keep it pushing. uh, because there are some chapters where I really resonate and I really find it interesting, the concept and everything, and it's a lot more relatable. And then you find more niche chapters and books and everything. So, yeah. We're going to start with chapter 7 because chapter 7 is interesting, right? The beginning goes over the principle of marriages, right? Paul's talking about marriage principles, right? And he pretty much starts it by saying, if you want to get married, go ahead and get married, man. Just don't deprive each other of each other, right? The wife belongs to the husband belongs to the wife, right? Um, but pretty much he's saying, you don't have to marry. Um, it's not like a requirement, but if you're in, if you have a burning passion for your partner or just a lack of self control, it is way better to marry than to let Satan come over you, right? With lust. I'm sure there's more to it. Yeah, it says pretty much, divorce shouldn't be a thing for the most part. In verse 10 it says, "To the married I give this charge, not I but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife." To the rest, and I'm guessing that goes the same way, vice versa, which it literally goes against what's it called? In the gospel where Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees, right? And the Pharisees were like, well, the law of Moses, right? Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife, right? And he's like, not at all. I mean, only in the grounds of sexual morality, right? And that's it. But even then, I think there's some extra background to that. I'm not going to say it's fully just set in stone, hit right there. But yeah, and then keeping it going, he says for verse 16, for how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? And this is in context to earlier in the chapter where it talks about if you have an unbeliever as a partner or whatnot, to let them stay with you, right? And it's kind of, but if God's saying it, right? Well, I mean, Paul's given the message relay, and why not trust what Paul's saying in this regard, especially since he's speaking to Corinth about how to become a better church, right? Um, and in those regards, right, um, it's pretty much saying that they will be saved through you, right? And I think it's more or less that because y'all are one person, right? And in both of you, that one person getting saved saves both of you. At least it's my interpretation. So yeah, unless that's not how that works, but that's a good question, right? Um, uh, Continuing on in the chapter, Paul pretty much talks about living as we've been called, right? He starts it out with chapter, or not chapter, verse 17, saying, "Only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called them." Um, and pretty much he's saying, whatever purpose God has for you, saved or not saved, it will be done either way. Just follow your purpose. At least that's what I got from the uncircumcised and circumcised in verse 19 or 18, continuing into 19. As he says, halfway through 18, was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision, for neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God, right? So maybe I was kind of wrong, but keeping the commandments of God is the overall main thing here. Being a Gentile and everything, you haven't been circumcised yet, so don't follow the previous laws of the Jews, but do what God has set before you, trust in God and let Him lead you to what He needs you to do in this life, right? Um, and then he proceeds to go into the unmarried and the widow. Going further in, he pretty much talks about, if you're marrying, it's not a sin to marry. Overall, he brings up the idea that pretty much if you are married, your tune is going to be a lot more focused in the world, seeing as you would naturally want to please your husband or naturally want to please your wife, but you won't really have your sights on God completely, right? And then I like what he says later on in the section in verse 37 where he says, "But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desires under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well," right? Betrothed meaning engaged slash married, right? And it's pretty much saying if you have control and you don't need that um, verification, satisfaction in the sense, and you can just fully put your faith in God and just lead off of that, then, all is well with you. But also, it's not a sin to want more for your wife or your husband, right? At least that's my interpretation of it all. And he pretty much ends up clearing the chapter with, a wife being bound to their husband and a husband being bound to their wife, and that if one dies, you're pretty much free to remarry and such, right? But yeah, we're gonna keep it going. I'm gonna choose another chapter, but number 8, I'm probably not gonna go over number 8, but it pretty much goes over how food is idols. That's pretty much what it is. Paul's saying, not to make food your idol and to overall just eat whatever you want to, as long, as it's not sacrificed to any pagan god or anything, right? As long as it's in God and you pray it in God and you knowingly eat it in God, then you shouldn't be tripping. Uh, but also in the context that if it makes somebody else trip in their faith, you shouldn't do it around them. So you can make them not trip in their faith, if that makes sense, right? Like if somebody doesn't like eating pork, don't eat pork around them. Or somebody doesn't like eating meat, don't eat meat around them. Be kind about it, right? And low key, I think I'm gonna call it there. I'll say I keep going so long with one chapter because there's so much content in there. 'Cause I usually want to keep them around the 10-minute mark, and I feel like I keep going over it. So it's like, yeah. But overall, I hope y'all enjoyed today and read the word. Deuces.